You know what we've not talked about yet on this podcast? Food. You can't have an in-depth examination of sports media without snacks. Think about what you're doing while watching a game or the barrage of advertising on the broadcast itself. According to a 2021 study, 5 of the top 10 advertisers in U.S. sports media fell under the category of CPG, or consumer packaged goods. That includes powerhouses like Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi, all of whom produce far more than just beverages. My guest on this episode has a background in both sports media and consumer packaged goods, and has a story I think you'll find spicy. Dan Ballister joins me on Media Credentials.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your Media Credentials have been approved. A confession and a milestone for the Media Credentials podcast. This is the first episode I've produced as the result of a PR pitch. I got an email from Pete Kowalski of Kowalski Sports and PR, a firm that works with numerous brands, mostly in golf, but he was pitching a different kind of client. Dan Ballister is a Naval Academy graduate with a diverse background in business, including time in David Stern's administration at the NBA. His current venture is hot sauce, specifically the General's hot sauce, made in South Carolina. Pete wanted to know if I'd like to have Dan on as a guest. At first, I was hesitant. Had this guy even listened to the podcast? And how does hot sauce tie into sports media? But I was curious, so I gave Pete a call. As Pete told me the story of Dan, I started to see a path. It is an all-American story. Naval Academy grad completes his active duty and turns to sales, then pivots to work in digital media and sales in professional sports, bonds with fellow Academy grads and friends over golf trips and tailgate parties, and then at the Army-Navy game, an idea is spoken out loud. That inspiration turns into a viable business with a mission. Okay, Pete, you got me. I'm in. When I booked Dan for the interview, something told me I'd better be ready a few minutes early, and I was right. His military precision hasn't left him. You can tell by how specific he is with his answers, and though the episode is shorter than most, I don't think we missed anything. From the high seas, to the hardwood, to hot sauce, this is the Ballad of Dan Ballister. Dan, we've bounced around trying to find a time to do this, but I'm really glad we did, because I feel like this is going to be a long and winding road to get to the General's hot sauce. First of all, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And where are you these days? Where are you located?
I am in the shadows of world headquarters of the General's hot sauce in Columbia, South Carolina.
That's not where you grew up, though, right? You were a Northeasterner.
That's right. Western New York, Rochester to be specific.
Yeah, I know it very well. I went to school in Ithaca. So let's go back a ways to the Naval Academy, because the Navy and the Army-Navy game is a big part of this story eventually. What compelled you to go to the Naval Academy?
It was such a great opportunity. Even as a 17-year-old kid, you see the best of facilities, the best of education, a guaranteed job when you get out. And best of all, you can't beat the price on admission. So that package, and all wrapped around the idea that you know you're going to get to serve your country. And even when you're 17, you know there's something right about that. So it's a pretty compelling package.
Were you into sports when you were growing up?
I think I played any sport that had a ball, or a puck for that matter. If I wasn't eating dinner, I was playing a sport.
And golf is also going to be a part of the story a little bit later. When did you start playing golf?
You know, it's funny. I never had the chance as a kid, and I had done my first deployment to the Western Pacific in '88. And as soon as I came home, I bought my first set of clubs and haven't put them down since. Well, I've upgraded, but I haven't stopped playing.
I can tell you As the child of two military brats, both my parents, both their fathers flew, that golf is an integral part of the military experience. I can't tell you the number of amazing golf courses I've seen at military installations. Why do you think that is?
Well, number one, they're more fun than a runway or a shooting range.
Well, that's true.
And number two, it's just great for troop morale to be able to get out, get together. If you can steal 4 hours or even two for that matter, and get out with your shipmates, with the other folks you serve with, and just get away from the fight for a little bit, it's a great relief.
What were you doing? You mentioned the deployments to the Pacific. What was your job?
I took one for the team, and I was based in San Diego, California.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good team. And I was a surface warfare officer, so I was assigned to two different ships in San Diego, and was able to complete two deployments to the Western Pacific as part of that rotation of service.
Graduated from the Naval Academy in '86, 5 years active, as you mentioned. What profession did you first enter once you left the Navy?
I think it was the profession that required the least amount of hardcore experience, and that was sales. If you weren't afraid to talk back in the 80s, you could sell.
And who'd you work for?
Yeah, I picked up my first job with a company called Reckitt and Coleman, which was a consumer packaged goods company, and I had the sales territory right in San Diego. So that was my first exposure to selling hot sauce, by the way, because one of the brands we owned at the time was Frank's Red Hot Sauce.
Oh, sure. And eventually, and again, you can go back and fill in the holes, but to stay on the sports slant for a bit, eventually you end up in the NBA. What were you doing in the NBA, and how did you get to that role?
It wasn't my basketball ability, I promise you. I had spent at that point around '04, somewhere in there. I'd spent 5 or 6 years working in digital media, and I lived in New York City and had some friends who were associated with, near, close to the NBA, and were aware of an opening there. And they put me in touch with the right people. It had always been a dream of mine to work in pro sports in some level. And I fell in love with the opportunity and was lucky enough to get selected for it.
Was this during the David Stern era, I imagine?
It was indeed. Yes, David was running the show back then, and it was a real pleasure to work for him.
Yeah, that's my next question. What was he like to work for?
I give David a lot of credit for what I think he brought more than anything to the role. That man could see not only around the corner, but he could see what was in it for him around the corner. He was very plugged into marketing and could build a relationship, it seemed, with anybody. And he was a hands-on guy who wasn't afraid to ask hard questions and wait for good answers. And he kept you on your toes. And that was really the third rail, in my opinion, of the NBA. His expectations of us were high, and we worked hard to deliver.
So what was the job description at the NBA?
I was involved in digital marketing and sales, mostly with generating ad revenues or doing digital marketing for NBA.com, WNBA.com, the G League site. And I got to work with all the teams that had coordinators who ran all the team websites. So it was a great opportunity to help drive tune-in for the NBA games and also to help drive exposure and, not to mention, ad revenue from the website for the league.
So trying to think of the era that you're talking about, who were the big stars that were being promoted by the league?
I remember being at the All-Star game in 2005 in Houston and looking across the room and seeing the C part when Shaquille O'Neal walked into the room. And I characterize that, in my mind anyways, I think back, as the Shaquille era. He was, first and foremost, the guy. And just, you could see him across any room, and you could probably hear him across any room too. But, he was front and center. And it was such a great game. And the league did so well back then. But I always remember him as the center of the bullseye.
Kind of breaks my heart because I'm from Orlando, and my first job out of college was an internship with the Orlando Magic, which led to a full-time job. And my first year in the league was Shaq's second year in the NBA and Penny Hardaway's rookie season. Right. And that team went to the finals in 1995. And we thought, oh, this is going to happen every year. And then,
wouldn't it be nice, right?
wouldn't it be nice? And it turns out that, as you've learned, nothing is forever in professional sports, right?
It is fleeting.
I mentioned the connection to golf, and you've got a collection of friends. I read that you volunteered as a standard bearer at a couple of Walker Cups. Tell me about that experience.
Yes, I had a good friend who was a standard bearer in 13 at the Walker Cup at the National Golf Links. And then in 15, when the tournament moved to Royal Lytham in St. Anne over in England, some friends of mine and I, through the Met section in New York, volunteered as whatever we could get a job doing. Standard bearer, on-course scorekeeper, whatever it took. I was even willing to hold up the be quiet sign. But we got to be on course, walk with foursomes, and to help keep score and hold standard bears, and just, get inside the ropes. It was a really special experience, knowing, number one, that Walker Cup, in my opinion, is the best kept secret in golf. And number two, just to really get up close and personal, see great golf, and be on the inside. It was a great experience.
Now, these friends, were they part of the same group that would go to the Army-Navy game every year?
There was a lot of overlap there. And that game's in December. So it seemed like when we got together for the Walker Cup in September, we'd start figuring out what our game plan was going to be for 3 months later in December when we got to the game, depending on where it was going to be and how good Navy was that year. So that was always a factor too.
And that takes us to the second sports angle here, and that is the annual Army-Navy game, which I think is, speaking of underrated, one of the greatest spectacles in all of sports, not just college football. Being on a standalone weekend, I know that it's a reunion of sorts for graduates from both schools, from both academies, and that's where the General Hot Sauce story starts. So tell me the story.
You're right about the game. There, as we often joke, there isn't a safer parking lot in America than the Army-Navy game. But it is. It's rich in all kinds of tradition and loyalties and friendships. And for us, it's always been a great chance to reconnect with a lot of old friends. And, good things like conversations about business eventually come up too. We started first talk at the game before Hot Sauce ever came up about the idea that it would be great for us later in life as guys in our early 50s at that point, who to put together a business that we could work on together, a chunk of whose profits we could donate to help military and veteran families. We had the idea in our head of kind of a self-watering plant that we could feed and could feed itself and could grow and do some good in the world to help our troops out. And that was the genesis of the conversation. And then ultimately, when one of our friends, who at the time was a general in the Marine Corps, walks by with a plate of buffalo wings he's just cooked that are delicious, someone shouted out, "That guy deserves his own hot sauce." And from there, imaginations took over and we slapped together a business.
And describe how that business works now.
It's surprisingly simple, but unbelievably fun. As I mentioned earlier, we're here in Columbia, South Carolina. We set out to do two things, as I mentioned: hire veterans and donate money to help the troops. So after we committed to start the business and got serious in 14, 15, we found growers here in South Carolina that would grow for us after having grown a little bit in Louisiana. And we decided that the world didn't need another boring hot sauce or another lousy hot sauce. So we figured, let's find great packaging, let's commit to a premium product. And we already had our why figured out as far as trying to support the troops. So we found a way to put all three together. And next thing you know, you've got hot sauce in a bottle that looks like a hand grenade, and it's got more peppers in it than any other hot sauce in the industry. And here we are writing checks to the military and feeling great about it.
I almost wish we were doing a video call so I could show off the product packaging. And I understand, it looks like a hand grenade. It's a glass hand grenade with hot sauce in it. And I understand at least one customer ran into trouble in an airport trying to carry the hot sauce.
Yes. If you fly through Manchester, New Hampshire, you better be careful. We know that much. But yes, this poor guy who we're still trying to find because we want to send him a replacement bottle. He inadvertently carried a bottle of the sauce in his his carry-on luggage. And of course, TSA, who had already posted on their Instagram page about not bringing the General's hot sauce on, of course, pulled it out, and the local television station found out about it, and they ran a little bit about it on the news that night and advised their viewers not to do the same.
I understand that the general in the General's hot sauce, his identity is a closely guarded secret. Is that true?
Yes, Whit, you are well informed. The general is an old friend of mine, and he's still on active duty, even though we're getting a little bit up in years. But we agreed from day one that we'd had his blessing to call it the general's hot sauce, but that secondarily we'd never reveal his name, and we haven't yet. He has nothing to do officially with the business other than to serve as our inspiration. But we keep his name under lock and key until he retires.
That's fantastic. How has the reception been? I mean, obviously, creating employment opportunities for veterans, donating profits, you're doing good work. But how has the reception been among the general public?
It's been better than we anticipated. Of course, we've got to work a little harder to make it better, but it's been fantastic. We think we've seen people really gravitate towards this unique packaging, and I think once they get to learn about our mission and that we're actually trying to make a good product, but also do good things in the world, it endears them to the brand. And I think they're a little bit more willing to at least try the product or maybe buy it as a gift for a friend that fits into some of those categories of people that we talked about. And so the reception has been great, and we're bottling as fast as we can to keep up with the demand. Should you be in Columbia, South Carolina on Saturday, December 9th, we're going to do a remote tailgater for the Army-Navy game here in Columbia at World Headquarters, as we like to call it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is that open to anybody?
Oh, you're damn right it is, sir. Yeah,
that's so cool.
We invite all our friends from around the country, our investors, and all our friends locally. But we get a good national crowd coming in. We'll have 400 or 500 people here, and we raise money for a dedicated charity every year. This year, it's the Big Red Barn Retreat in Columbia, which helps veterans fighting against PTSD and TBI. But we pass an ammo can around. We don't charge anybody to be here. We just ask them to be good citizens and donate to the cause. And so we'll raise thousands for Big Red Barn Retreat that day.
The product, as mentioned, has a tie to the Army-Navy game, and you've talked about your connection with the game of golf. And I wonder, as a business person who had spent some time in the NBA, as you mentioned, during one of its peak eras, and there were many, but certainly that was a very powerful era for the National Basketball Association.
Sure.
As a businessman looking from the outside, what are your thoughts on how sports are delivered today in terms of media? And I'm trying to tie this back, obviously, to the theme of the podcast. What are your thoughts as a fan on how sports media is delivered?
I think as a fan, my personal feeling is it's better than ever. There's certainly more options on what and how to view than there ever been before. The world, I think, the sports world has made so many improvements in production quality and delivering the product to the fan. And as David Stern used to say this all the time at the NBA, he said, our job is to follow the fan wherever they want to go. And with all these different mediums emerging and different new ways to connect with fans, whether it's live or after the fact or information, data, fantasy, whatever it might be, even a traditional news story, there's more and better content out there for a sports fan now than ever before. It's easier to find than ever before. And you could almost eat it up 24 hours a day. It's the best time in the history of the world to be a sports fan.
So putting the two together, are you hoping to create some partnerships? Is the idea to do some sponsorship opportunities with professional or college teams? I mean, is there a possible tie-in there for you?
There is, but we looked hard last year at what the demographics of our customers were that were purchasing our product. And lo and behold, there is considerable overlap between the makeup of that audience and the makeup of golfers and golf fans. So we spent the last year trying to get to know the golf community better. And as we continue to grow, we think a lot about, number one, that overlap, that virtuous overlap, and what that could mean for us down the road. And number two, we think the hot sauce category, and whether the barbecue sauce category, et cetera, we think it lends itself really well to some sort of sports partnerships that allow us to help get the word out incrementally about our products and our purpose and our mission. We love the sports category as just being full of enthusiasm and passion. And I don't know that you see that in a lot of other categories. So we think for sure there's a way to do that. We've dipped our toe into golf a little bit this year, but we think there's more on the other side that we can build towards over time as well.
What's your goal for the General? What's the ultimate for you in terms of growing and developing the business?
We always talk about building, first and foremost, about building a great American brand. I want the kids who work for us to be able to take their grandkids into the store in 40 years and show them a brand they helped build. That's always been number one for us, is build a great American brand. And number two, as we start to wind down the path, and we all know that how it finishes isn't always how you think it's going to finish. Now, for us, we define it as whatever it is we want to win. We want to feel good about it, whether it's other partnerships, whether it's mergers, whether it's acquisitions, whether it's go it alone and keep building, or anything in the middle. Our objective is build a great American brand and win. We think about that every day, and we try to make good decisions towards that, knowing that the CPG, as it's called, the consumer packaged goods industry, is a very popular category with a lot of players in it. So you've got to work hard to stay a step ahead. But great American brand and win.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. What started as a PR pitch developed into a pretty good story, so I'm glad I followed my own advice of always say yes. That's not the only theme of Media Credentials that I heard in this interview. The necessity of staying nimble, being ready to pivot, encouraging good ideas, and working the problem. We could be talking about the producer in the truck, or we could be talking about a former Navy surface warfare officer who went on to work for the NBA before becoming a hot sauce tycoon. To learn more about the product and the story, their website is generalhotsauce.com. I recommend the Dead Red flavor. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.